Okay, so now we're recording. All right, first of all, there'll be a test on Wednesday in Canvas. So the test will open at 10 a.m. and you'll need to have started it by 1 in order to finish it in time. Once you start the test, you'll have an hour and 15 minutes to complete the test. You will be shown one question at a time. And so once you answer that question, you won't be able to go back to the question. So you're going to have 20 questions that are either multiple choice or matching. And then you're going to have 2 open response questions. All right, so most of you took the quiz to kind of practice on that so you can see what that will be like. This time around, I'm not going to have a fill in the blank, but could be on the next test. So we're finishing up chapter 12 today, and after we finish up this chapter and have the test, and we only have 2 more chapters to go, so we're getting close to the end. Okay, before we go through that, I want to look at, where did that go? There we go. An example of defense mechanisms. So on your screen, you have 4 different scenarios. And if you don't, somebody needs to tell me. So you should see 4 different scenarios. So right now, I want you to read those 4 different scenarios about Danny, Jessica, Natalie, and Jared. Okay, so we have Danny who says, no, I haven't been smoking. We've got Jessica who told her mother her battery died and must have messed up. We've got Mrs. Smith who's saying her daughter will be fine. And then we have Jared who said, at least I didn't hit her. That would be abusive. One of these is an example of the defense mechanism denial. So who can tell me which one is the defense mechanism denial?
Is it the Jessica story?
Okay, it's not the Jessica story. Okay, she's just basically lying to her parents. And so lying is not denial.
Is it the Jared story?
Yes.
Yes.
No, it's not the Jared story. That's an example of something else that I'll get to in a minute.
It's Mr. and Mrs. Smith, right?
Yes, it's Mrs. Smith is in denial that her daughter has a problem. Denial is refusing to perceive the reality of a situation. So she's refusing to perceive that her daughter has a problem. So that's denial. Okay, the other's just denying something or lying about something is not a defense mechanism. All right, now with Jared, what defense mechanism is that when he says, at least I didn't hurt her? What defense mechanism is trying to give an acceptable reason for unacceptable behavior?
Would that be Jared?
Okay, we're talking about Jared, but I'm saying what defense mechanism is he using?
Is it rationalization?
Yes, yeah. It's rationalization. Rationalization is giving a socially acceptable excuse for unacceptable behavior. All right, good. Okay, I'm going to, and also when I'm sharing the screen, I can't see the chat. Okay, so now we're going with the slide. All right, can you see the slide with the iceberg?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, these are, I gotta zip through here quickly. These are things we went through before. We had all the defense mechanisms. Now, when I ask you on a test to give me some defense mechanisms, I'm not going to accept repression, so don't use that one. Okay, so there's a hint of kind of question you might see on the test. Okay, and then we had the psychosexual stages. We went through both Adler and Horney and Jung. Of course, Jung talked about the archetypes and the collective unconscious. Horney talked about the most important thing was a child's relationship to the parents. And then we went through the trait theories. So we had the 5-factor model, and we had Ocean as a way to remember the 5-factor model. All right, so that brings us to the humanistic theories. The emphasis in the humanistic theories is that people are naturally good, or at worst, they're neutral, or that they possess a positive drive towards self-fulfillment. The humanistic theories say that the personality develops from the internal feelings and thoughts and a sense of basic worth. And so personality and behavior depend on how we perceive and interpret the world, not on traits or unconscious impulses or rewards or punishments. So some key figures in the humanistic theories are Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. As far as Carl Rogers' concepts, Rogers believed that everyone naturally approaches and values people and experiences that enhance our growth and fulfillment, and we avoid those that do not. And so that key component of personality is the self, an image of the self, and what a person defines as I or me. And so what we have is our concept of ourself, our self-concept, and then we have what we experience in the world. If our self-concept matches our experience pretty well, then we're well adjusted. But Roger said that if our concept of ourself doesn't match our experience, that's when we become poorly adjusted. And so we get into a concept brought up by Carol Dweck in a book called Mindset. When you were growing up, what your parents said to you when you did well affects your mindset. If your parents, when you did good, if your parents said, oh, you did so good because you're so smart, then your mindset is that you're succeeding because you're smart. If your parents said when you did good, oh, you did good because you worked so hard at that, then your mindset is that your success is based on your effort. And so what happens is if your mindset is that you're succeeding because you're smart, when you hit something that challenges you and you can't figure it out, that experience doesn't agree with your concept. And so then you say, well, maybe my parents were wrong. Maybe I'm not so smart. And people with that mindset, that's a fixed mindset, they tend to give up. The people whose parents told them, oh, you succeeded because you work so hard, when they get to that challenge, that's something they can't do, then they say, oh, I can't do this yet. So I got to find a way to do it. Maybe I need to work harder, or maybe I need to ask different questions. And that's why sometimes I see people who are A students in high school go to college, they hit that challenging part and they think they can't do it and they drop out of college. And then I see C students go to college and they hit the same challenging thing, but they're used to the fact that in order to succeed, they have to work. And so they figure out a way and they work harder, they go get help, and then they succeed. So you really got to ask yourself, what kind of mindset do you have? Because if your mindset is that you are succeeding because you're smart, then you could have some challenges later when things get tough. And if that's your mindset, the good news is you can change your mindset. You're not stuck in that fixed mindset. So if you really reflect on that, you can change that so that when you have these challenges, you realize that being smart is something that's helped you and helps you be efficient. But when there's a challenge and you can't do something, then you need to figure out a way, or you need to work harder, or you need to ask questions. So really think about what kind of mindset you have, because that's going to affect your success later. All right, Carl Rogers believed that people with low self-esteem or poor mental health are a result of early childhood experiences with their parents or with other adults who make their love and their acceptance conditional on behaving in certain ways and only expressing certain feelings. So, you know, when you misbehave, you got punished. But in that process, did you feel that even though you were punished, your parents still loved you? Or when you got punished, did you feel that you were then not being loved by your parents? And that's going to have a big effect on people's personality development. If the child learns that his or her negative feelings and behaviors, which we all have negative feelings and behaviors, are totally unacceptable and unlovable, then his self-esteem and his self-concept might suffer. Of course, in humanistic psychology, our self-esteem, our self-concept is the key factor. So to help children develop to their fullest potential, adults need to create an atmosphere of unconditional positive regard, where we have positive behavior with no contingencies attached. Okay, we love the child regardless of if they behave well or they behave badly. And so then children realize that they're going to be accepted no matter what they do. Now, that doesn't mean you don't punish the child. It doesn't mean you don't, or it doesn't mean you let them do whatever they want to do. Okay, yes, if they are misbehaving, there's consequences. But you separate out the value of the person from the behavior. So the humanists believe that you guide children to control their behavior. So if a child gets angry and he hits his younger sister, okay, the parent might say, nice children don't hit their sisters, they love them. Well, in order to gain the parental approval, then the child has to deny his true feelings of anger, but insidely, he secretly suspects that he's not a nice boy, okay, because he did hit his sister. And at that moment, he did not love her. Okay, he hit his sister, but the parent said, you know, nice children don't hit their sisters. Well, I hit my sister, so I guess I'm not a nice child. Okay, so repeated instances like this have a type of lasting effect on the self-esteem. So we want to think what might be a more appropriate response to this. So if we were in the classroom, we'd probably discuss this, but think about what you would say to the child instead of, you know, nice boys don't hit their sister. Okay, obviously you want to stop them, so you might say, okay, you're not going to be able to play with your sister unless you can control your anger. So now we're separating the behavior, okay, from the evaluation of the child. We're not making a judgment on the child. We're not saying good boys don't do this. We're not saying you're bad, okay? But we're saying there's a consequence to that behavior. So unconditional positive regard is when you feel that you are loved even when you mess up. If as a child you had unconditional positive regard, then you probably have healthy relationships. If you feel like your love is based on your behavior, that could have a significant effect on your relationships as an adult. If you're feeling you have to behave a certain way in order to be loved, then that's going to produce a bad relationship. So instead of being yourself, you're going to have to try to do things to make the other person love you. And so that can have a bad effect. All right, Maslow talked about the hierarchy of needs. So we've seen this before. Okay, he said we're striving toward self-actualization. Okay, where we want to develop our full talents and capabilities. Maslow believed that there's a basic goodness to human nature and that we have a natural tendency towards self-actualization. Okay, that inborn drive to develop all of one's talents and capabilities. So that involves understanding one's own potential and accepting oneself and others as unique individuals and taking a problem-solving approach to life situations. We talked about problem-solving approaches before, where we deal with the problem. And so Maslow had a hierarchy of needs, that there's basic physical necessities that have to be satisfied before those higher growth needs. All right, so you remember the hierarchy of needs, that we have those physiological needs, okay, not psychological, physiological, of hunger, thirst, and to maintain homeostasis. So those have to be met first. Once we met our basic needs, then we need to feel safe. We need to feel secure. We want to seek pleasure and avoid pain. When we have that sense of safety, then we can go on to the belonging and love needs. So we want to affiliate with others. We want to be accepted. We want to be able both to give and receive affection. When those needs are met, then we can go to the esteem needs, to achieve, to be competent, to gain approval and excel. And once we feel that esteem needs, then we can go on to realize our true potential and find self-fulfillment. So Rogers is saying that certain things need to be done. If you have this need to achieve and you're doing your work, but all of a sudden, you know, the gallon of Coke you drank earlier is catching up with you, then you need to stop and you need to run off and go to the bathroom to take care of those physiological needs. Okay, you need to feel that you have a home that's a safe place. When you feel that, we talked about that before with the monkeys, they begin to explore and have that curiosity and go out. But you need to feel that you have a secure base in order to do that. And then, of course, we want to feel like we belong to a group, the family, the friends, the whatever. And so this is something that predators, child predators, and terrorist organization prey on, that sometimes people are having issues in their family, and so these kind of people say, oh, your family doesn't understand you, but I understand you. And, you know, I really get what's going on with you, and they're fulfilling that need of belonging. And so then they can manipulate people by bringing them in. All right, when we look at the humanistic theories, there's concepts of humanistic theories that have successfully been incorporated into therapy. So that's something that's good. Some of the cons are that there are some naive assumptions that we're saying everybody is good when we look at situations around the world with Syria and terror organizations and things like that. We don't have a lot of ability to test some of these things. And unlike Freud's theories, which were very comprehensive and in-depth, the humanistic theories are a bit narrow. The next group of personality theories are the social cognitive theories. Here, they're saying that our personality is part of how we interact with our environment and other people. And also it's how we think about certain things and how we interpret the things that happen to us. The key figures are Bandura and Rotter. Bandura's key terms were self-efficacy and reciprocal determinism. According to Bandura, if you have a strong sense of self-efficacy, okay, your learned expectation of success, then you believe you can generally succeed, okay, regardless of any past failures you have or current obstacles you have. According to the concept of reciprocal determinism, your self-efficacy beliefs are going to affect how you respond to others, and that's going to affect how then others respond to you, and then that's going to affect your chances for success. So, for example, here's an example. You have some kind of thought or a cognition. Your thought is, I can succeed. Because you believe you can succeed, that affects your behavior. So then I'm going to work hard and ask for a promotion. That, your behavior then affects the environment, affects your employer. So my employer recognized me and recognized my efforts, and I got promoted. So that reciprocal determinism, you have a thought, affects your behavior affects others, which in turn comes back to affect you. That's the concept of reciprocal determinism. Another key term is cognitive expectancies. What people expect to happen and the reinforcement value that's attached to certain specific outcomes. So Rotter's theory suggests that learning experiences create these cognitive expectancies, and that guides our behavior, and that influences the environment. So your personality is determined by, one, what you expect to happen following some specific action, and then two, the reinforcement value that's attached to that outcome. Okay, you're going to work differently if you expect to succeed than if you expect to fail. Okay, and then once you succeed, if you're reinforced, and that helps you continue to engage in that kind of behavior. And if you don't get a reward, you get punished, then you're less likely to engage in that behavior. Rotter also talked about a locus of control, what people consider the source of their rewards and punishments in life. So we have internal locus of control. We talked about this before, that if you believe that your success is because of your efforts, then you're going to work harder. If you have an external locus of control, that you believe that what happens to you is just a matter of fate or chance or luck, then you're not going to work as hard at certain things. And so your locus of control is going to affect your personality and your behavior. When we look at the social cognitive theories, okay, that brings in how the environment affects our personality, okay, and how we affect the environment. It gives us some things that we can test and we can look at data. On the con side, again, we have a very narrow focus. We don't have a lot of in-depth substance to these theories, and it doesn't look at the emotional aspects attached to personality. Okay, which approach to personality emphasizes internal experiences and the basic goodness of the individual? This is where I find out if you've been listening.
What are these are humanistic theories?
Okay, the humanistic approach. What did Rogers believe is essential to a child's healthy personality development? What is it that had to match experience? This is an important question because there's a question that has to do with this on the test. So this is really important to get this right.
Is it positive regard?
No, unconditional positive regard is an element of Rogers' belief, but and he said that's important, but that affects something. What is it that that affects in the individual?
Would it be self-esteem?
Yes, basically that's what we're talking about, self-esteem or self-concept. Okay, good. All right, and unconditional positive regard then affects the self-concept, whether they believe they're good or bad. The last group of theories are the biological theories. And so the biological theories have three major contributors to personality: brain structures, neurochemistry, and genetic factors. So brain structures, we can do EEGs, electroencephalograms, and look at brain activity in certain areas of the brain. And we find that there are certain areas of the brain that are associated with certain personality traits. Okay, the neurochemistry is the levels of enzymes and chemicals that are in our body, and there's certain levels that are associated with certain personality traits. I'm going to look at one of those in a minute. And then genetics, we look at to what extent our genetics determine our personality, what we inherit from our parents and other ancestors. If we can do studies, we can look at people who share the same genetics but are raised in unshared environments. Okay. When we start looking at genetics causing our personalities, then that can lead to prejudice that, oh, that, they're like this because of certain genetics, and that can lead to prejudice. It can also lead to people feeling like they're victims. So I'm this way because of genetics, and they don't try to change then. One of the things that we see in people is certain sensation seeking that's been linked to the levels of monoamine oxidase, which is MAO. That's a certain enzyme that regulates the levels of neurotransmitters like dopamine. Of course, dopamine is what gives us a good feeling. And so people who are high sensation seekers and extroverts tend to experience less physical arousal in these situations than introverts when they have the same stimulus. So when extroverts have that low arousal, then that motivates them to seek out situations that are going to elevate their arousal level. So there's how neurochemistry can affect our personality, that if we have this high levels of this enzyme, then we don't get as excited as much over the same kind of stimulus. So we seek out more exciting things than people who are lower in this enzyme. We always come back to the biopsychosocial model that says, there's not just one thing that affects us. And so the same thing with personality. The biopsychosocial model says that there are multiple things that affect our personality. There's the genetics, of course, there's the shared things, there's environmental factors that affect us, there's unshared things that each of us experiences, okay, and there are other factors. So there's a lot of things that affect us. Now, how do we measure personality traits, or what do they use in therapy? One way to measure personality traits is with things like this slide. It's called a thematic apperception test. And so if we were in the classroom, this would be a little easier because I could see each of you and call on you. But if we're in the classroom, I'd have you write a little story about this and tell me what's going on here, okay, and what led up to it. So I want you to just kind of think in your mind about these things. What's going on here? What led up to it? Who are the people in the picture? How do they feel? And what's going to happen in the next few moments and in the next few weeks? So in a classroom, we'd spend some time, each of you writing that down, and then we'd share those out. From what a person writes, what this slide can tell us is a level of their need for achievement. Remember, that was one of the personality traits that we talked about, was a high need for achievement. And so if we'd give a point system, we'd give 1 point for defining the problem. If somebody defined a problem, they get a point. If they solve the problem, there's a point. If they talked about obstructions to solving the problem, there'd be a point. If they talked about the techniques that help overcome the problem, there'd be a point. And if there was an anticipation of success or a resolution of the problem, there'd be a point. And so the higher the points that a person scores, then we'd say the higher they are overall in their need for achievement. There'd be another kind of test that I would show you and ask you to come up with a story. And sometimes when we look at things, we come up with things that a psychologist can then begin to explore, because sometimes a person, when they're going through therapy, doesn't want to just start off with telling the stranger, everything that they're feeling or thinking about. So sometimes by giving some kind of picture of people or something and asking what's going on, the person begins to say things, and then the psychologist can begin to pick up from that. So they get them talking, And then from what they say, they can ask questions. So they might be looking at a picture of two people and saying, well, the other person's hurt by something that person said. And so then the psychologist might ask, well, what was said? Why are they hurt? And then, have you been hurt by something that somebody said? And then we start directing those questions in a more personal nature and can begin to explore what's going on with that person. Another thing we look at is the image on your screen right now. So this is something that's kind of fun to do in class because we can just start calling on people. And we ask people, what do you see in the picture? So this is something else that has things that, a lot of people will say the same thing. Different people will say different things. There's things that people say that might be associated with a certain personality trait, or we can begin exploring when people say things, we can begin asking questions and begin exploring their personality. So this image is from the Rorschach test, okay, which is a subjective test. And so there's a number of different ink blots that we would show people and ask them what they see. Other methods to get personality assessments or interviews. Obviously, we can get a lot of in-depth information. We talk to people, ask them questions. We can use observations. We can go to maybe their family or their workplace or other ways to observe how they behave in certain situations. We can use objective tests like the MMPI, which is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. Or we can use projective tests. So we're seeing if people project their feelings onto these pictures or images that we show. So I talked about the MMPI. The MMPI is something that when I was working on my master's degree, when we had our oral examinations, they had you take the MMPI first. And then they tried to use what they found in the MMPI to some way use that against you in the interview process. Like they're saying, well, this shows that you have this weakness. Isn't that true when you did this? And so, what they're doing is seeing how you respond to that kind of question. Because if you're going to get a master's in psychology, they don't want people who are going to be easily upset going and working with others. So they're seeing if you get upset and go off the handle, or if you address what they've said in a rational way. So the MMPI is an objective personality test that's really highly used in the field of psychology. And it has different scales, the first being hypochondriasis. So is a person saying they have a lot of physical complaints? There's a depression scale that would indicate if the person has some serious depression or pessimistic issues. There's a hysteria scale that would indicate if they're suggestible or they're immature or they're self-centered or they have a very demanding personality. There's a psychopathic deviant scale, which would see if they're rebellious or they're very nonconformist. There's a masculinity-femininity scale that is seeing if their interests are like those of the same sex or the opposite sex. There's a paranoia scale to see if they're very suspicious or resentful of others. There's a psychothenia scale, which sees if they're fearful or agitated or brooding. There's a schizophrenia scale that shows if they're withdrawn or if they're showing some very bizarre thinking. There's a hypomania scale, which sees if they're distractible or impulsive or dramatic, and the social introversion scale to see if they're shy or self-effacing. And then it also has some validity scales. One is the lie scale. So it's trying to see if they're trying to paint the saintly picture of themselves, that they're denying common problems that everybody has. So maybe that the test isn't as valid because they're lying. There's a confusion scale. So a lot of times when you take these tests, you see questions that are very similar. Are they answering the same, or do they seem to give answers that are contradictory? There's a defensiveness scale where it sees if they're trying to minimize their social and emotional complaints. And then, of course, questions that they don't answer. If there's a lot of unanswered questions, then our results become less accurate. We need to see answers to all the questions. So this personality test is something that's very common when we're working with individuals. So when we look at using personality assessment with observations and interviews, obviously we can see how people are interacting or get information, but the con to that is that that's time consuming and expensive to do. Projective tests, we can get some real insights when people are projecting their feelings, okay, or their traits or their emotions onto the images and what's going on. But that's not something that's as measurable, so it's not considered as valid. Objective tests, obviously we can get a lot of information from a lot of people and standardize that information and get some very clear information. Of course, when people take the test, the con side is that they're not answering the questions truthfully. And so there's deliberate deception, or they're trying to look better. And so they're not answering correctly. We also might look at, are there cultural biases in the way the questions are asked? And that could be a problem. And of course, the problem is inappropriate use. If we're labeling people as certain personality types and telling them, then that can lead to self-fulfilling prophecies and things like that, or it could lead to prejudices. So there's pros and cons, but we try to balance those when we're working with individuals to try to help them in the best way possible. All right, so that ends our section on personality. So now, are there any questions? Are there any questions about the test that you're going to take on Wednesday? Okay, not hearing any questions. All right, so Wednesday, you're going to go into Canvas sometime between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. and you're going to take the test. So we don't have class on Wednesday then, so we're not meeting live. You're just logging into Canvas at some point and taking the test. Okay. Okay, wish I could see all your beautiful faces. Miss you guys, but good luck on the test. And if you have any other questions, then you can email me. So you guys have a great day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.